It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of day when nothing special was supposed to happen.
Liar,
The sun was soft, the streets were calm, and people were going about their normal routines. Inside a small neighborhood store, everything looked ordinary. Shelves were neatly arranged, the bell above the door rang every time someone entered, and the low sound of a radio filled the air. The store owner stood behind the counter, counting change and glancing at customers now and then, just like he did every day. A few minutes later, a shopper walked in. He looked simple, clean, and calm. Nothing about him seemed unusual. He picked up a basket and started walking slowly through the aisles, looking at items carefully. He was not in a hurry. He checked prices, read labels, and compared products like any normal customer would. To him, this was just another quick stop to buy a few things before heading home. But behind the counter, the store owner noticed him. At first, it was just a quick look. Then another. And then another. For some reason, the owner felt uneasy. He couldn't explain why, but a strange feeling grew in his chest. He tried to ignore it and went back to his work, but his eyes kept returning to the shopper. Every movement the shopper made seemed suspicious to him, even though there was nothing wrong with it. The shopper picked up a packet of snacks, then put it back. He moved to the next aisle and checked some drinks. He paused for a moment, thinking about what to buy. To the store owner, this normal behavior looked like something else. In his mind, he started creating a story that was not real. He thought the shopper was acting too carefully. He thought the shopper was looking around too much. He thought the shopper was hiding something. The store owner had been running this store for many years. He had seen theft before, and those old memories were still fresh in his mind. Instead of seeing the present clearly, he was seeing the past. Every small action by the shopper made him more nervous. His hands became stiff, and his face grew serious. He leaned slightly over the counter to keep watching. The shopper, meanwhile, felt completely relaxed. He didn't notice the eyes watching him so closely. He was thinking about dinner, about what he needed to cook, and about how tired he was from work. He checked his phone for a shopping list and smiled when he found a message from his family asking him to bring something home. He had no idea that his normal day was about to change. As the minutes passed, the tension grew on only one side. The store owner's heart beat faster. He convinced himself that something bad was about to happen. Instead of asking the shopper if he needed help, instead of giving him a friendly smile, the owner stayed silent. He chose suspicion over communication. The store felt different now, heavy and uncomfortable, even though nothing had actually happened yet. Another customer entered the store, and the bell rang again. The owner barely noticed. His full attention was on the innocent shopper. When the shopper moved toward the back of the store, the owner felt a sudden wave of fear. In his mind, this was proof. He believed the shopper was trying to hide. His thoughts raced, and logic disappeared. The shopper reached for an item on the top shelf and stood on his toes to grab it. At that moment, the owner's suspicion turned into certainty. He whispered to himself that he had to be careful. He thought about the money he had lost in the past, about the stress of running a business, and about how tired he was of being fooled. Without realizing it, he had already judged the shopper. The air inside the store felt tense, even though no one had spoken a word. The shopper turned around and smiled politely when he noticed the store owner looking at him. The smile was friendly and harmless, but it only made the owner more uncomfortable. He looked away quickly, pretending to fix something on the counter, but his mind was already made up. This was the moment when everything started to change. A normal day was no longer normal. A simple shopping trip was no longer simple. One man was just buying items for his home, while the other was silently building a story that wasn't true. The space between them was filled with misunderstanding, fear, and silence. Neither of them knew what was about to happen next. The shopper placed a few items in his basket and walked slowly toward the front, ready to pay and leave. The store owner watched every step, his fingers tightening around the phone behind the counter. His breathing became shallow. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that he was protecting his store. And in that quiet moment, before any words were spoken, before anyone knew the truth, the tension reached its peak. What started as a normal afternoon had already turned into something else entirely. A single decision, made in silence, was about to change both their lives forever. The shopper moved deeper into the store, unaware that the atmosphere had already changed. What felt like a normal place to buy daily items had quietly turned into a space filled with hidden tension. The store owner's eyes followed every step the shopper took, not with curiosity, but with doubt. A small voice inside the owner's head kept repeating the same thought again and again: something is not right. The shopper paused near the shelf with cleaning products, picking up one bottle, then another. He read the labels carefully, comparing prices, trying to choose the best option. His actions were slow and thoughtful, the way someone acts when they are spending their own hard-earned money. But to the store owner, that slowness looked like hesitation. He believed the shopper was waiting for the right moment to do something wrong. Behind the counter, the store owner wiped his hands on a cloth even though they were already clean. His heart was beating faster now. He leaned forward, pretending to arrange receipts, but his eyes never left the shopper. Every time the shopper turned his head, the owner looked away quickly, as if he had been caught doing something wrong himself. The tension inside him was growing, and he didn't know how to stop it. The shopper walked toward the drink section and picked up a bottle of juice. He checked the expiry date, then put it back and chose another one. He placed it in his basket and sighed softly, relieved to have made a decision. He was thinking about getting home soon, about sitting down and resting after a long day. He had no idea that his normal actions were being watched and misread. The store owner's mind was now full of stories. He remembered times when people had stolen from him and walked away without any shame. He remembered the anger, the loss, the feeling of being cheated. Those memories mixed with fear, and fear turned into suspicion. He no longer saw a customer, he saw a threat. And once that thought settled in his mind, everything the shopper did looked wrong. The shopper moved closer to the counter, then turned into another aisle. The owner's stomach tightened. Why was he moving around so much? Why wasn't he coming to pay? These questions echoed in the owner's head, even though the answers were simple and harmless. The owner didn't ask. He didn't speak. He just watched. Another customer walked in, but the owner barely noticed. He gave a quick nod and went back to staring at the shopper. The store felt quiet, too quiet, like something was waiting to happen. Even the radio music sounded low and strange, as if it knew trouble was coming. The owner reached into his pocket and touched his phone, not taking it out yet, but feeling its weight. The shopper bent down to pick up something from a lower shelf. At that moment, the owner's breathing stopped for a second. In his mind, this was the moment. He thought the shopper was hiding something. He thought the shopper was putting items in his bag. His thoughts were no longer calm or logical. They were fast, messy, and full of fear. The shopper stood up and placed the item in his basket. He looked around, searching for the price tag, and then smiled when he found it. It was a small, quiet smile, the kind people make when things go their way. But the owner saw that smile as something else. To him, it looked like confidence. Confidence of someone who thought they wouldn't get caught. The store owner finally picked up his phone and held it in his hand. His fingers trembled slightly. He told himself he was being careful, that he was protecting his business, that he was doing what any smart owner would do. Still, something inside him felt uncomfortable, but he pushed that feeling away. Fear was louder than doubt. The shopper moved toward the counter again, basket in hand, ready to pay. His face was calm, his steps slow. He stood near the counter and waited, not realizing that the owner was not preparing the bill, but preparing to make a call. The air between them felt heavy, thick with something unspoken. The owner turned his back for a moment, pretending to check something behind the counter. In that second, he unlocked his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. One call could change everything. One call could turn this simple day into a nightmare or a lesson. He took a deep breath, his mind already convinced of a lie. The shopper cleared his throat softly, trying to get the owner's attention, still patient, still unaware. The owner turned around slowly, his face serious, his eyes cold. Without saying a word, he looked at the phone again. The decision was made. And just like that, without a single accusation spoken aloud, without a single question asked, the store owner pressed the call button. The silence broke, not with words, but with a choice that would soon shake the lives of everyone inside that small store. The phone call was short, but its effect was heavy. The store owner spoke quietly, his voice low and serious. He told the person on the other end that there was a suspicious customer inside his store. He said he believed the man was trying to steal. He gave a quick description and then hung up, his hands still shaking. The decision was made, and there was no going back now. The shopper stood at the counter, still waiting patiently. He placed his basket down and looked around, noticing how quiet the store had become. The radio music had stopped, and the air felt strange, almost cold. He smiled politely at the owner and said, "Excuse me," but the owner did not answer. Instead, he nodded slowly and began scanning the items, his eyes never fully meeting the shopper's face. Outside, a police car was already on its way. The shopper felt something was off, but he couldn't understand what. He checked his wallet, making sure he had enough money. He looked at his phone again, reading a message from home asking him to hurry. He tapped the counter lightly with his fingers, still calm, still unaware of the storm that was coming. To him, this was just another small delay in a normal day. The store owner finished scanning the items and told the shopper the total. His voice was flat, with no warmth. The shopper handed over the money, and the owner counted it slowly, carefully, as if he was looking for another excuse to doubt him. When he gave the change back, his hand brushed against the shopper's fingers, and both of them felt it, a moment of tension that had no words. The shopper picked up his bag and thanked the owner. He turned to leave, but before he could reach the door, the sound of sirens filled the street. The noise was loud, sudden, and sharp. The bell above the door rang as the police car stopped right outside. The shopper froze. The store owner looked up, his face pale but firm. The door opened, and 2 police officers walked in. Their uniforms filled the small store, making the space feel even smaller. Other customers stepped back, their eyes wide with confusion. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to stop moving. One officer looked at the store owner and asked if he was the one who called. The owner nodded quickly and pointed toward the shopper. "That's him," he said. "I think he tried to steal something." The shopper's heart dropped. His mind went blank. He looked at the officers, then at the owner, trying to understand what was happening. "What?" he said softly. "I paid for everything. I didn't do anything." The officers asked him to step aside. Their voices were calm but serious. The shopper's legs felt weak, but he obeyed. People were watching now. Strangers. Neighbors. Faces full of curiosity and judgment. The shopper felt his cheeks burn with shame, even though he had done nothing wrong. One officer asked to see the bag. The shopper slowly handed it over. The officer opened it and checked each item carefully. Everything was there. Every item was paid for. There was no stolen item, no hidden product, no proof of anything wrong. Still, the second officer asked him to empty his pockets. The shopper did as he was told, his hands shaking slightly. His phone, keys, and wallet were placed on the counter. Nothing else. Silence filled the store again. The kind of silence that makes every second feel heavy. The store owner watched closely, his confidence starting to crack. His eyes moved from the bag to the pockets to the receipt on the counter. For the first time, doubt entered his mind. What if he was wrong? What if he had made a mistake? The officer picked up the receipt and checked it against the items. Everything matched perfectly. He looked at the shopper and then at the store owner. "There's no problem here," he said. The words felt like a wave, washing over the shopper's chest. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. But the damage was already done. The eyes on him, the whispers, the humiliation, none of that disappeared. The store owner's face turned red. He tried to speak, but the words came out weak. I thought, he said, then stopped. There was nothing left to say. The officers turned to the owner, their expressions firm. They asked why he had called without checking properly. The owner looked down, unable to answer. His fear had made him blind, and now everyone could see it. The shopper picked up his things slowly. His hands were steady now, but his heart was heavy. He looked at the store owner one last time, not with anger, but with disappointment. Then he walked out, the bell ringing softly behind him. Outside, the sun was still shining. The world looked normal again, but for the shopper, something had changed forever. And inside the store, the owner stood frozen, realizing that one wrong decision had just turned an ordinary day into a moment he would never forget. The moment the police stepped into the store, everything changed. The small shop that once felt quiet and normal now felt like a stage where everyone was watching. The innocent shopper stood near the counter, his bag still in his hand, his heart beating fast. He could feel eyes on him from every corner. Even the shelves seemed to stare. He had never felt so exposed in his life. One of the officers asked him to step forward. The shopper nodded slowly, trying to stay calm, though his hands were cold and his mouth felt dry. He looked around, hoping someone would speak up, hoping someone would say this was all a mistake. But no one did. The other customers stood silently, holding their baskets, afraid to move, afraid to be noticed. The store owner stood behind the counter, his face tight and serious, pretending to be confident. But inside, his chest was heavy. He watched the officers question the shopper, and for a brief moment, a small voice inside him whispered that he might be wrong. He pushed that thought away. It was too late to turn back now. The officer asked the shopper simple questions. His name. Where he lived. What he had come to buy. The shopper answered everything honestly, his voice steady but quiet. With every answer, he felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on him. He had done nothing wrong, yet he stood there like a criminal. A woman near the door whispered something to her friend. A man near the fridge section shook his head slowly. The shopper noticed it all. The looks. The judgments. The silent opinions. It hurt more than the questions. It hurt more than the fear. Because these people didn't know him, and yet they were already deciding who he was. The officer asked to see his bag again. The shopper handed it over, his fingers shaking just a little. The officer took out each item and placed them on the counter, one by one. Bread. Milk. A bottle of juice. Cleaning supplies. Normal things. Everyday things. The kind of things anyone would buy. Still, the officer checked everything carefully, as if expecting something to appear out of nowhere. The store felt frozen in time. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft rustling of plastic bags and the quiet breathing of people trying to stay calm. The shopper stared at the floor, wishing he could disappear. He had never been treated like this before, and the shame was burning inside his chest. The store owner watched the items being placed on the counter. His eyes moved quickly, searching for proof. Something. Anything. But there was nothing. No stolen item. No hidden product. Nothing to justify the call he had made. His stomach twisted. His confidence started to fade, replaced by a feeling he hadn't expected, regret. The officer then asked the shopper to empty his pockets. The shopper did it slowly, carefully, like someone afraid to make the wrong move. His phone, keys, and wallet landed softly on the counter. The officer checked them, then looked at the store owner, then back at the shopper. His face showed no anger, only disappointment. Everything is fine, the officer finally said. The words felt heavy, but not in a good way. They didn't erase what had already happened. The embarrassment. The fear. The silence. The stares. All of it stayed. The shopper nodded, but he couldn't speak. His throat felt tight, like something was stuck there. The officer turned to the store owner and asked him to explain. The owner opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked around the store, at the people watching him now, at the man he had accused, and finally at the floor. His hands were shaking. He realized, too late, that he had let fear control him. A few customers whispered again, this time not about the shopper, but about the owner. The mood had shifted. The shame had moved from one person to another. The store owner felt it, and it hurt. The shopper gathered his things slowly, his movements calm but heavy. He placed the items back into his bag, one by one, as if trying to rebuild himself. He could feel his face burning, but he kept his head up. He had nothing to hide. Before leaving, he looked at the store owner. Their eyes met for a second. No words were spoken, but everything was said. The owner looked away first. The shopper walked toward the door. The bell rang softly, like it always did, but this time it sounded different. It sounded like the end of something. Outside, the street was bright and normal. Cars passed. People walked. Life went on. But inside the store, the silence remained. The store owner stood still behind the counter, surrounded by his own mistake. And the innocent shopper walked away, carrying more than just groceries. He carried a moment he would never forget. The store felt different after the shopper walked out. The silence was no longer tense, it was heavy with regret. The store owner stood behind the counter, staring at the door, replaying everything in his mind again and again. The police officers were still there, not in a hurry to leave. Something about the situation didn't feel finished, and they could sense it too. One officer slowly looked around the store. His eyes moved from the counter to the shelves, then to the small security camera in the corner. "Do you have cameras?" he asked calmly. The store owner nodded without looking up. His throat felt dry, and his heart was beating fast again, but this time it wasn't fear of theft, it was fear of the truth. The officer walked behind the counter and checked the monitor. The screen showed the last few minutes of the recording. The store owner watched nervously as the officer pressed rewind. The room filled with the soft sound of the video playing. Everyone in the store went silent, even the customers who were about to leave stayed, drawn in by curiosity. On the screen, the innocent shopper appeared, walking into the store. He picked up a basket. He moved slowly through the aisles. He checked items. He put some back. Everything looked normal. Very normal. No hiding. No stealing. No strange behavior. Just a man shopping. The store owner's face turned pale. He could see it now, clearly. All the things he had imagined were not real. The story he had built in his mind was nothing but fear and old memories. The officer rewound again, this time watching carefully when the shopper bent down near the lower shelf. The video showed him clearly placing the item in his basket, not in his pocket or bag. A small sound escaped the store owner's mouth. It was half a breath, half a broken sigh. He felt something heavy drop inside him. He wanted to speak, to explain, to take everything back, but the moment was already bigger than him. One of the customers whispered, "He didn't do anything," and others nodded. The truth was now visible to everyone. The innocent shopper had been judged without reason. Accused without proof. Humiliated for no crime. The room felt full of shame, but this time, it didn't belong to the shopper. The officer paused the video and turned to the store owner. His voice was calm, but firm. "You should have checked this before calling," he said. "You put an innocent person through a very difficult moment." The store owner nodded slowly, unable to meet his eyes. His hands were shaking now, not from anger, but from guilt. "I thought. I was sure," he whispered, but even he knew how weak those words sounded. The officer continued checking the footage, and that's when something unexpected appeared. The video showed a different moment, earlier that day. A young boy had come in, grabbed a small item, and slipped it into his jacket when the store owner was busy. He had walked out without paying. The owner had never noticed. The officer stopped the video and pointed at the screen. "This is where something was stolen," he said. "But it wasn't the man you accused." The store owner's knees felt weak. The truth hit him like a wave. He had called the police on the wrong person. The real thief had walked out freely, and the innocent man had suffered for it. His mistake was now complete, and everyone could see it. The customers began to murmur again, louder this time. Some shook their heads. Some looked angry. Some looked sad. The store owner felt smaller than he ever had before. His store, once a place of pride, now felt like a place of shame. The officer told him that false accusations were serious and that he needed to be more careful in the future. He wasn't being arrested, but the lesson was clear. The owner nodded again, his eyes filled with regret. One of the officers stepped outside to make a call. The other stayed behind, giving the owner a chance to breathe. But the owner couldn't. He kept seeing the shopper's face, confused, hurt, embarrassed. He realized that saying sorry would not be enough. Some damage cannot be undone. The officer returned and said they would try to find the innocent shopper to clear his name properly. That gave the store owner a small, painful hope. He wanted to fix what he had broken, even if it was too late to make things right. As the police finally left, the store slowly returned to its normal sound. The radio came back on. The bell rang again when someone entered. But the feeling was not the same. The truth had surfaced, and it had changed everything. The store owner stood alone behind the counter, staring at the camera screen. This time, he wasn't watching customers with suspicion. He was watching himself, a man who let fear speak louder than fairness, and who learned the truth only after hurting someone innocent. The truth had already been revealed, but what happened next shocked everyone even more. The store owner was still standing behind the counter, lost in his guilt, when the door opened again. The bell rang softly, and for a moment, everyone turned to look. It was the innocent shopper. He stood at the entrance, holding his phone in one hand, his face calm but serious. One of the officers had found him outside and asked him to come back. The store felt silent again, but this time it wasn't tense, it was waiting. Waiting for something important to happen. The shopper walked slowly toward the counter. His steps were steady, but inside, his heart was beating fast. He had almost gone home, almost left everything behind, but when the officer explained what they had discovered, he agreed to return. Not for revenge, not for anger, but for truth. The store owner looked up and froze. His eyes widened, and his face went pale. He hadn't expected to see the shopper again. Shame filled his chest, heavy and burning. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The moment felt bigger than any apology he could give. The officer cleared his throat and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "We reviewed the security footage," he said. "This man did nothing wrong. He paid for everything. He was falsely accused." The words echoed through the store. The customers who were still inside looked at the shopper with new eyes, eyes full of understanding and regret. A woman whispered, "I'm sorry," though she wasn't even sure if he hurt her. The shopper nodded once. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, holding his phone, letting the truth wash over the room. For him, it wasn't about being right. It was about his dignity, which had been taken from him in front of strangers. Then the officer turned to the store owner. "There's more," he said. The officer played the footage again, showing the moment when the real theft had happened. Everyone saw the young boy slipping the item into his jacket. The store owner covered his mouth with his hand. His legs felt weak. He leaned on the counter for support. "I accused the wrong man," the owner whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." He stepped out from behind the counter and stood in front of the shopper. His pride was gone. His fear was gone. Only regret remained. He bowed his head slightly, not as a show, but because he couldn't look the man in the eyes. "I judged you without knowing you," he said. "I made a terrible mistake." The shopper looked at him for a long moment. The store was completely silent. Even the radio seemed to stop. Finally, the shopper spoke, his voice calm but strong. "You didn't just judge me," he said. "You humiliated me. In front of everyone." The words hit harder than any shouting could. The store owner nodded again, tears filling his eyes. "I know," he said. "And I will never forgive myself for it." Then something unbelievable happened. The shopper took a step forward and gently placed his hand on the counter. "I accept your apology," he said. A wave of shock moved through the store. No one expected that. The customers looked at each other in disbelief. Even the officers exchanged a glance. The store owner looked up slowly, his eyes wide. "You do?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Yes," the shopper replied. "Because holding anger will only make this moment bigger. And I don't want to carry this pain with me." The store owner broke down. He covered his face and cried, right there in front of everyone. Not fake tears. Not weak tears. Real ones. The kind that come when a person finally sees the truth about themselves. The officer stepped forward and placed a hand on the owner's shoulder. "This is a lesson," he said quietly. "One you won't forget." The shopper picked up his bag from the counter. Before leaving, he turned back and looked at the people watching him. "We all make mistakes," he said. "But we should always choose kindness first." Then he walked toward the door. The bell rang again, soft and gentle. This time, it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like forgiveness. Outside, the air felt lighter. The sun was still shining. The street was still busy. But inside the store, something had changed forever. The store owner stood in silence, knowing he had witnessed something rare, not just the truth, but mercy. And that moment, more than the accusation, more than the police, would stay with him for the rest of his life. The store owner stood behind the counter, still shaken from the events that had just unfolded. The shopper had left, but the weight of what had happened pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He had been so certain, so sure of his suspicion, and yet he had been completely wrong. The reality of his mistake was sinking in, and it was more painful than he could have imagined. For the first time, the store felt different. It wasn't just a place for selling goods, it was a place where a lesson had been learned the hard way. The customers who had witnessed everything whispered among themselves, shaking their heads. Some stared at the counter, their expressions a mix of disbelief and sympathy. Even the young boy who had actually stolen the item earlier had disappeared, leaving only the truth behind. The store owner's hands trembled as he picked up the receipt from the counter. He looked at it as if it held answers, but all it showed was evidence of innocence. Every item had been paid for. Every move had been lawful. And yet, the damage had been done. He realized that no receipt could fix the embarrassment, the fear, or the humiliation he had caused the shopper. He sank into a chair behind the counter and buried his face in his hands. Memories of the call to the police, the officer's arrival, and the shopper's terrified expression replayed in his mind. The fear that had guided his actions had blinded him to reality. Every rational thought had been replaced by suspicion. Every opportunity to ask, to clarify, had been ignored. Outside the store, the shopper was already gone, returning to the safety and comfort of his normal life. But for the store owner, there was no comfort. Only a gnawing feeling of guilt and regret. He had learned something he would never forget: assumptions can ruin lives, and fear is a dangerous guide. Hours later, he closed the store, the quiet hum of the lights the only sound in the empty space. He walked through the aisles slowly, touching shelves and checking the counters. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. He thought of the faces of the customers who had watched the scene unfold, their silent judgment and pity. He thought of the officers who had calmly revealed the truth. And he thought of the shopper, innocent and dignified, who had left him to face the consequences of his own actions. The next day, the store owner tried to make amends. He posted a notice on the store door, apologizing for the misunderstanding and acknowledging the mistake. It was a small gesture, but it was the first step toward making things right. Some customers smiled, some nodded, and some simply shook their heads, accepting that even the best-intentioned people can be wrong. Word of the incident spread quickly in the neighborhood. People spoke about the shopkeeper's error, the shopper's patience, and the importance of fairness. Some were critical of the store owner, others were impressed by his willingness to apologize, but everyone agreed on one thing: the situation was a powerful reminder that assumptions can destroy trust. The store owner reflected deeply on what had happened. He thought about how fear had led him to act without thinking, how old memories of theft had clouded his judgment, and how easily he had misread an innocent man's behavior. He vowed never to let fear guide him in the future, realizing that true responsibility meant checking facts before acting, and treating people with dignity even in moments of doubt. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal in the store. Yet the story remained, whispered among neighbors and shared with friends. The incident became a lesson not just for the store owner, but for everyone who heard about it. It reminded people that a single mistake, made in haste, could have devastating consequences, and that humility, patience, and understanding are always more powerful than fear and suspicion. And though the shopkeeper continued his work, each interaction with a customer became more careful, more thoughtful. He learned to watch with empathy rather than suspicion, to ask rather than assume, and to seek truth before acting. The memory of the innocent shopper, and the mistake he had made, stayed with him every day, a constant reminder that true justice begins with fairness, understanding, and humility. The day had started like any other, but it ended with a lesson far greater than any sale or profit. The store owner had been forced to confront his own errors, and in doing so, he learned the value of human dignity, the cost of fear, and the power of mercy. That lesson, painful as it was unforgettable. The incident that began on an ordinary afternoon did not end when the shopper walked out of the store. In fact, that day became something far bigger than anyone could have expected. Word traveled quickly through the neighborhood, carried by whispers at cafes, conversations on the street, and social media posts shared by curious onlookers. The story of the store owner falsely accusing an innocent shopper, and the shocking truth that followed, spread like wildfire. People were captivated not just by the drama but by the powerful lesson it carried. The incident became a talking point in local groups, shared in online communities, and discussed endlessly. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, how the shopper reacted, and how the store owner faced the truth. Videos, screenshots, and retellings circulated rapidly, giving the story a life of its own. Suddenly, what started as a small misunderstanding had become a viral lesson in fairness, judgment, and humility. The innocent shopper, meanwhile, quietly returned to his life. Friends and family who had heard about the incident were both shocked and proud. He had maintained his dignity in a situation that could have easily destroyed it. He had been calm when falsely accused, patient when questioned, and forgiving when the truth was revealed. For him, it was not about revenge or anger, it was about moving forward with integrity. His calm and composed response became an inspiration to many who read about the incident online. Back at the store, the owner faced the reality of his actions every day. The story had brought both criticism and reflection. Some people were harsh, judging him for acting hastily. Others were understanding, acknowledging that fear and experience could sometimes cloud judgment. But for him, the most important lessons were personal. He now knew that assumptions could ruin lives, that fear could override reason, and that humility and accountability were far more powerful than pride. The story began to attract attention from local media. Journalists interviewed witnesses, officers, and even the store owner, piecing together the chain of events. Each retelling highlighted not just the drama of the false accusation but the larger message about empathy, patience, and justice. The neighborhood where it happened became known for the story, and people visited the store not out of curiosity alone, but to understand the human lesson it carried. The store owner made changes in response. He posted a formal apology inside the store, publicly acknowledging the mistake. He installed clearer security measures, not to mistrust customers, but to ensure transparency and prevent misunderstandings. He also began greeting shoppers more openly, learning to build trust rather than suspicion. Each day, he reminded himself of that afternoon, how quickly fear can blind judgment and how easily assumptions can hurt someone else. For the wider community, the story became more than entertainment. It was a cautionary tale, shared in conversations, workplaces, and even schools. People discussed it as an example of why it's important to verify facts before making accusations, why empathy matters more than assumptions, and why patience can prevent unnecessary pain. The shopper's calm response and the owner's eventual humility provided a full circle of lessons that everyone could take away. Even months later, the incident lingered in people's minds. It had left a mark on the store, the owner, the shopper, and the neighborhood. What had started as an ordinary shopping trip had turned into a story of accountability, integrity, and the surprising power of forgiveness. It reminded everyone that while mistakes are inevitable, the way we respond to them defines who we are. In the end, life returned to its usual rhythm, but the story remained. The store continued to operate, the shoppers came and went, and the lessons of that day quietly influenced the community. It became a reminder that truth always surfaces, that dignity can withstand false judgment, and that a single moment of patience and understanding can turn a shocking situation into a life-changing lesson. The story had begun with fear and suspicion but ended with clarity, humility, and respect. It became a viral testament to human nature, the mistakes we make, the courage we show, and the forgiveness that can transform even the most unbelievable events into a lesson the world will never forget.